Sit and Goes with Colin Moshman. Today it'll be Spin and Goes with Colin Moshman and guest. We'll introduce today's guest in just a moment. And hoping that people can see and hear okay. Welcome to Aid Runo, master of the Spin and Go. Good job on your results in these. We see and hear you, and you know what I want to hear as well, which is awesome. So that is perfect. And let's go right to today's guest. Today's guest is a master of many formats. He's crushed short-handed MTTs. He's played heads up for a long time, and he's also an excellent spin and go player. Please welcome Honigman38.
Hey guys, how are you?
Welcome, Honigman, and hello to Endutsu77 Beatdown Star. Great to see you guys on here. So let me go ahead and maximize. So say something, David. I think that we can hear you pretty loud. Tell us a little bit about Spin and Goes and whether these are good games to be playing.
Well, I just kind of got into Spin&Goes somewhat late after they got introduced, and I thought they were pretty good games, and I still believe that. I come from a heads-up sit-and-go background, so they weren't really super new to me. So I thought that I just give them a shot, and I thought play was really terrible up to really higher levels of those. I played, I think, like all levels. The higher ones not with a reasonable sample because I think those are obviously harder, but up to 15s I think you can just really get in a lot of good volume and make some money.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree with that. They're by far, for any given buy-in, they're the softest games going. And you have to endure huge swings compared to some of the other formats, but definitely, $15 spins are going to be a lot softer than, for example, $15 Turbo 9-mans and other formats.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you just have to consider the rake as well. That's definitely a reason to be careful when playing them, but I think they're still, despite the high rake, still very beatable.
Okay, awesome. So what we're going to do is start off talking about the different player types that we will encounter. In the general poker discussion forum, in the spin thread, I've put in the weekly lesson for you guys to check out, and I have that up on my screen. So we're going to talk about these different player categories, and then we're going to look at some hands that Honigman has played in spins where he played them exploitively based on him categorizing opponents, and then we're going to go to live play. So let's start off, and the first one here is a calling station. And the big thing about calling stations, they're not going to play aggressively. They are not going to raise a lot or value bet much, and so they're great players to value bet against and not bluff against. So I assume you'd agree, David, these are really great players to be up against. There's a ton of value playing against a calling station.
Yeah, I agree with that. You just have to adjust your ranges a bit and then raise value, widen your value range. Basically, I mean that's what you're told when you're playing against someone who doesn't really fold much. But it's just sometimes really as easy as that when it comes to spin and goes, as well as in other formats.
Yeah, I totally agree. And a lot of times people take the wrong approach against calling stations in that they actually still try to bluff them. There's a famous hand from Poker After Dark, or one of those poker TV shows, where Viffer is up against some billionaire who's never folding. And he three bets pre and triple barrels with like 9 high. And the billionaire just snap calls him down with second pair, with king deuce. And that's just the wrong approach, professional like Viffer, and yet you see that a lot. You see people taking fancy lines when you just have to play really straightforward ABC poker against these guys.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You don't have to get really fancy or get into their heads because I mean, if you try to outthink them, you're probably just outthinking yourself anyway. So it doesn't really make much sense to go like super deep into theory when you're playing against them.
Yeah, I totally agree. Another cool thing you can do against these guys is sometimes open limp, particularly from the small blind. Like if you have a hand, let's say like 5-4 suited, and the effective stack isn't too deep, Well, if you raise and we assume that they're pretty much always going to call, we have less than 50% equity with 5 first suited. So we don't necessarily want to raise pre-flop. At the same time, we don't want to fold because, a lot of the time we can take it away with a small bet on a dry flop or value bet when we connect. So we can open limp and they're not going to raise very often.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that as well. The thing is, if the stacks get too shallow, then you can't just they don't if they there are some player types who will just like call pre-flop and then call a lot of c-bets but fold to too many second barrels. If you know that if stacks are deep enough, then you can obviously exploit that as well. But for the ABC type of calling station that will just never ever fold really, then you just go ahead and limp those hands, especially when stacks are that shallow. I agree with you.
Yeah, for sure. But one thing that you said, which I think is really important, is that guys who are loose passive, like we can pretend that they're never going to fold in terms of conceiving a strategy, but there are actually times when they will fold. So a common example, like if you are going to limp stab, and let's say the flop comes ace deuce deuce, like they're probably not going to call with 9 high on the flop. They might, but that's still a good time if you have 5 first suited. Well, you'd actually have a gut shot there, so not total air. But to just go ahead and put in a small bet, and those guys will usually fold when they have absolutely nothing.
Yep, definitely true.
Okay. So next we have the Maniac. One thing that's kind of funny about Maniacs is so a Maniac is someone who's going to also not fold very often, but much more aggressively. They're always raising and three betting. And the funny thing is that when stacks are shallow, it's not a good strategy to play, but it's not like a terribly bad strategy to play either.
Yeah, I mean, the Maniac is definitely a lot tougher to play against than the calling station for sure because he might not be as good, but he'll definitely put you in tough spots when you don't really know whether you can call down with like second pair or something, and that'll make it a bit tougher. So you have to adjust your strategy as well there.
Yeah, that's very true. And it might be the case that when you get all in against a Maniac, you have very high equity. But if you wait for that spot, they can win a lot of small pots in the meanwhile and chip up that way. And so, it's possible that you've lost half your stack. You finally have a chance to double through them. But even if you do, you're only getting back to starting or just over.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of funny because I read something like that on the forums where someone was like some older guy was like criticizing the new online generation was saying something along those lines that I'll just stack you when I get aces, and they were like, yeah, then you have like 15 big blinds or something, and so that's cool. So that was kind of funny. And that's basically what happens. And in Spin and Goes even more because your stacks are that shallow that you can wait for like your 70 plus equity spots. And those just don't come up all that often.
Yeah, absolutely. So you really have no choice but to take a stand against them. So you were giving the example of having second pair. Now, a lot of the time if stacks are deeper, second pair can be a marginal hand. But if you're playing a spin and go and you're up against a Maniac on a lot of flops, second pair would be a really strong hand that the best way to play could just be to check call him down even if his river bet is a shove.
Yes, yes, that's true. I mean, it really depends on what kind of board texture, obviously. I
Right.
mean, a second pair on like 8-7-3 or 8-4-3 or something is very different from like an ace queen deuce type board where you have queen jack or something. It's much easier to call down then, obviously. So it really depends. You might just want to get in more money when you to kind of protect your hand there if you have a weak second pair or something like that. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so the tips here given in the article on maniacs are well, the first one is play tight, which is kind of interesting because sometimes against a maniac you should play tight and sometimes you shouldn't. So, as an example of a time that you should, if you're in the small blind and a maniac's in the big blind, then you shouldn't just be raising really wide and counting on getting a lot of folds to show a profit with that open. But then a time that you might play looser against the maniac is if he makes a small raise in the small blind and you're in the big blind, you can defend very wide because when you connect in any way, you have profitable call down and you've got good equity against this preflop open raising range.
Yes. I also think that you should just have some other plays than like the standard limp call or raise from the small blind. For example, you could, if there's someone who's a maniac who always ISOs you when you limp the small blind, then you should have a limp jamming range. I think that will make a lot of sense against some opponents, and have to construct it accordingly. But that would definitely make some sense as well.
Wait, I'm sorry, you said a limp jamming range?
Yeah,
Yeah,
from the
right,
small
okay.
blind.
Because, right, he's going to attack your limp very widely, for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly, exactly.
Um, Why Piranha today's guest is Honigman38. Let me put this in the coaching info box as well. Um, the Typhoon writes, Karn, the founder of poker strategy, always said against maniacs, avoid marginal hands and overplay your strong hands. Yeah, so right, it's not exactly overplaying them, it's just that, you should be a lot more willing to stack off, because if they're playing that many hands, it's really tough for them to, have a premium hand. So, other tips given here are try to induce bluffs, which is really important, um, because they're going to make a lot of, even hopeless bluffs. Not
Which,
bluffing them, again, that's not a total set in stone, but you shouldn't make that a cornerstone of your strategy. Um, and this last one here I think is really important. Just be consistent, have a plan, call down or fold right away. And so let's say, for example, that the maniac raises in the small blind and you call in the big blind with ace deuce. And the flop comes deuce 4 9 and he pots it. Well, if that's the case, then you really don't want to call and then, you know, not have any idea what to do on the turn when he pots it again. So as early as possible in the hand, you want to think, okay, am I planning to play for stacks, or more specifically, on what kind of runouts am I willing to stack off?
yes, I also think this is kind of like too broad. This be consistent, have a plan, call down a fold right away. I mean, it's important to have a plan, but as you said, examples where you fold, where you flop like bottom pair, you're gonna have a lot of trouble playing this on turns and rivers. So you might just, if you have ace deuce and you're like very shallow, it might make sense to just jam over his raise anyway, or do some other stuff. Yeah, I agree with this, but yeah, I don't really think this rule is set in stone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a plan that's subject to change, but don't let yourself be unprepared, basically, because typically if the maniac, they raise pre, they bet the flop, they're more likely than other opponent types to keep on firing. So basically, just to be prepared for that.
Yes, yes, I agree with this.
Okay, next is the net. And for loose and aggressive players such as yourself, David, I assume that you are very happy to encounter a net in your spin and goes.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. If I recognize them early enough, and I see that they are playing very nitty or have stats on them, yeah, I think that's the easiest type of player to play against because they will basically never ever really put you in a tough spots. They're easiest to range because they don't just have their ranges are not as wide as from a maniac, for example. So yeah, that's easy, and you can work a lot with getting some fold equity in a lot of spots and just make them fold better hands a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And so against the net, pretty much in a spin and go, the main value of playing against the net is in three-handed play. Two out of every three hands you're a blind, and so it's going to be attacking their blinds. And you're going to have very exploitive ranges. In other words, let's say that you're in the small blind, the nit's in the big blind, then you should fold either rarely or never, depending on if you think they might adjust. But at the same time, if they 3-bet you, you're going to continue on with a very tight range. So you would open up a lot of hands against them and be very tight when they play back against you.
Yes, this is just seems somewhat standard for like all poker formats basically, but yeah, that's of course that's true for Spin&Goes as well.
Right, right. And it says here, as soon as a nit raises you, you should only stick around and go broke with very strong hands, such as sets or better. Now that was written in the context, I think, of deeper stack play. In a spin, you wouldn't necessarily need a set. But in other words, the main way you're getting value from these players is by having them fold too much.
Yes.
And then we get to the tag. And the tag is looser than the knit, but not as strong as. So we're going to get last to the lag, and I think we're both going to agree that in spin and goes, or most short-handed formats in general, lag is going to be the strongest strategy, and probably second to that is the tag. So the tag is going to open a reasonable range of hands, and a common tag thing is that post flop they're going to see bet fairly often, but they're not really going to do too much complex beyond that. They're not going to be double, triple barreling as much or taking a lot of fancy lines.
Yeah, they will just play like on like a first level kind of basis. I assume. I think it's really tough to like when you play against players and you have their stats, then like categorize them and like their attack, a maniac, elect, because those. It's really tough to make them to just put them into one specific category. But yeah, for those, I just think that they won't barrel off all that often.
What you said is interesting about categorizing players because, at least for me, I find it a little bit tougher in spins because with nine mans, there's some guys that like I'll play with all the time, and I can really categorize them. Like this guy's a tag and this guy's a maniac, stuff like that. Um, in spins because there's a large player pool and also because it's shorter handed, so everyone's playing more. That is a good point, which is that often you're not going to be able to totally pigeonhole a player and say this is their exact category. But a lot of guys you will be able to generally say, well, he's playing pretty nitty or he seems like a maniac.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's really good to have a general guideline to go after, to know to put them in some kind of category, to just know what they are about to do and what they will never do.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think? I mean, on that topic of categorizing players, how important do you think the HUD is in spins?
Um, I think it's I personally think that I kind of struggle with reading those stats at the moment. I just went through my database, I think like a couple days ago, and really was just wondering whether I could use them as well as I can in for heads up sit and goes or shorthanded MTTs. But that might be just because I don't have a huge sample on a lot of players. So if I have like 10, 15, or 20 hands on them, you can't really read that much into this as if I was playing MTTs and had like 500 or 1,000 hands on someone. Then you might just have a better idea of how they're gonna play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm the same way. I definitely use a HUD when I play spins, but it's not as important a part of what I'm doing compared to other formats.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to play a heads up signal without a HUD recently, and I was just it didn't really work anymore. I just have to have those numbers on, and for a spin and go, I just feel like okay, we could also play this one without a HUD.
Yeah, I think you and I are both going to be kind of screwed if Stars ends up banning HUDs.
Yeah, that will suck a lot. When's this gonna happen, by the way?
I don't know. My impression is that there are a lot of people saying it's going to happen. That Stars hasn't actually said they're going to ban HUDs. They've talked about restricting software in various ways. If anyone in the chat knows different, let us know. But my impression is that, well, it could happen. They haven't announced that in any definitive way yet.
Yeah, I just only know that they're banning seeding scripts. I think for heads up sit and goes, they ban Sharky, Sharkestrator, those seeding software. But HUDs, I think there's something with the colors. You're not allowed to have like more than three or so colors in your HUD.
Yeah, that one made
Uh,
no sense to me. Who cares? Like, I
yeah,
don't know. It just seems very weird to me.
I might just have to change this too if I think about this because I think I'm using more colors. So
Oh no. um, our last player type is the lag, and the lag is like I was saying. I mean, the lag is pretty much the best strategy because of the fact that it's short-handed play, and you basically have to play a lot of hands. And so a lag is opening pretty often and playing aggressively, but unlike the maniac, he's selective and he understands. A good lag. There are bad lags as well. So against the lag, the tips given: play a tighter pre-flop game than against tags. Again, that's not a universal. I mean, like there are times when you would want to defend wider against the lag because they're opening wider, but basically not to rely on them folding as much as, say, a nit. Steal the blinds less often when the lag is left to act, and that is true relative to, say, a tight player. And the last one here given is avoid giving up too easily post-flop, especially on the flop. And the lag is going to be capable of making plays post-flop. Now, instead of just talking about this theoretically, we have a lag as the guest. So, David, how do you approach that, like post-flop? I mean, I assume that you're trying to read a lot into your opponents. What do you know about them? And use that to decide when to barrel and make these tricky plays post-flop.
Well, I it's I think it's really tough to explain, but I'll try my best. I just think that you just have to range your opponents. This is what it comes down to. And if you get some kind of grasp on what kind of range they're playing and what kind of spot, then you will just be able to make them fold what you presume them to have. And this is basically what earns you money. So that's what I'm trying to do when I approach this. I'll just usually try to play their ranges or my perceived range against their range, and then usually, hopefully, I will win more often than not.
Right, right. Okay, perfect. And like you said, it's kind of tough to discuss this in the abstract. So what we're going to do in a second here is go to a few hands that you've selected, all hands where you have played exploitively in some way. And while I'm pulling those up, if anyone has any questions on the different player types, how to adjust, or anything related to that, go ahead and type those in and we'll definitely answer those. And while we're waiting for, make sure there are no questions on that, tell us a little bit about these. Are these all played at the same buy-in as a starter?
Yes, I've played all of those hands at 15s, which is the level that I have like the biggest sample on, and the level that I usually play. I've tried out like 30s, 60s, and I think a couple hundreds as well, but that doesn't really make much sense because competition is just too tough. So I think at 15s you have a good fish to reg ratio, and even the regs are not like super great, obviously, because then they will play higher anyway. So I think this is a good level to boost your hourly, basically.
Okay, and at the 15s, are there certain assumptions that you make about unknowns before you've seen how they're actually playing?
Well, I just go from I just try to use the info I got on them, which is just the basics of everybody. Is just search them and see what they're playing. If they're playing like a lot of tables of spin and goes, then it's more likely that they have some sort of clue, I guess. And just check their like VIP status. So if they display this, if they are like have very low VIP status, then it's also very likely that they're not playing a lot because you earn VPPs really easily playing those, and just go by all that kind of stuff, just from not having seen them play a hand, obviously.
Right. Okay. That sounds pretty good. Adruno says, a comment rather than a question. I find players often change player types through different levels. And yeah, that's true. I mean, a common example of that is you'll often find someone who's, playing fairly tight and then starts shoveling a lot heads up, stuff like that. And that's a good point. You've got to be prepared to adjust. And another example of adjustment is you might miscategorize someone. I mean, you can have someone who's pretty lag and they're card dead for a couple of urbits. And so you think, oh, okay, he's folded 6 hands, he's probably going to be pretty tight. And that turns out to be incorrect. And once you notice that, you have to be prepared to adjust. Okay, so let's begin here with the open limp. Obviously, open limping heads up is becoming more and more popular. How often are you open limping here versus raising?
Excuse me 1 second. I have some sort of problem with my internet. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you. Is it? Can
Okay,
you hear
now
me?
I hear you better. Yeah, could you please repeat this question? I didn't really get it.
Yeah, of course. I was just saying that. How often here are you open limping versus raising?
Um, with in this specific example with Queen Five suited.
Yeah.
Um, well, if I see that the villain here didn't really three bet pre-flop or has been tighter in general, I tend to just raise and take down the blinds. That would be, I mean, my first approach would be to raise, and if I have a reason not to raise because the villain here is too three bet happy or too sticky pre and post flop anyways, then I tend to limp this hand.
Okay. So that makes sense. And for sure, because this is a good stack size for him to three bet shove. Whereas if you limp, he has a pretty poor risk reward ratio on a shove. Um, a lot of players will still shove over a limp, even good players, if they think you're unbalanced. But if you're also limping some strong hands, then they're back to the same problem of having a poor risk reward ratio. So he does raise us here. And what would your response be to someone who says, we've got queen five, stacks are kind of short, let's just give this up facing a 3x?
Well, I just thought that we have a suited hand in position and get somewhat okay odds. So I was just believing into my ability here to make this call in position. I think that is really powerful because on the flop, whatever action he takes, I think we get a pretty good idea on how he's going to play. And we're dominated. We're not dominated reasonably often. So I think this is somewhat standard call, I believe.
Okay. So he checks, and let's talk about what that means. A lot of times when a player shows some strength pre-flop but then checks the flop, indicates that their hand was literally fairly strong pre and then missed the flop. So for example, here that might be a hand like Ace Jack or Pocket Eights. Is that the kind of hand you put him on, or do you think his range here is still pretty wide?
Yes, this is exactly what I was thinking. Also, there could be traps in his range, but I don't think it's less likely that he traps on such a coordinated board when I limp call because my range might be connecting with this flop reasonably well. So I think yes, like some middle strength hands here a lot, like Ace King through like Ace Jack and Jacks or worse pairs, basically. That he would just not want to see bet. And also, I don't think he has like complete air here all that often. Like if he ISO'd me with like 7-8 suited, I think he would want to value bet those hands that have no showdown value on the flop. Just because if he checks those on the flop, it doesn't really make much sense to ISO them pre-flop. If he checks on this texture.
Yeah, absolutely. So we fire. He calls. Now here at the turn. Now when he check calls flop, that kind of validates the range you put him on, right? Because if he did have a hand like pocket nines or ace king or something, he probably wouldn't check fold, particularly when you size it as less than half pot. So our best guess is probably still that he has one of those hands. So you're checking back. Well, let me just ask, what's the reason we check back here?
On the turn, I check back because I think that it's really tough to get three streets of value from worse. So I think that if I check here, I allow him to get a free card, which means he will realize there's like 2 or 3 outs or something. But I don't think this is a huge deal because we have such a strong hand on this board. And yeah, I was just thinking that it was more likely that if I bet flop and then check turn and then bet a river again, it might look a tad more bluffy, and he might want to find a hero call with all those hands because he might want to go into check call mode with pocket tens, which would be perfectly reasonable, I think. But he might not want to call 3 streets there with like ace king.
Right. Okay.
Now the river is really a bad card because a lot of my bluffs on the flop just improved now because I might just bet flop with a flush draw, check back turn, which would make sense, and then finally get there on the river. Also, some kind of semi bluff, some kind of bluff on the flop. If I have like 7-8 or something, or some kind of hand with an 8 in it that I want to bet on the flop because I have like run a straight draw or something that got there too. So I didn't really like this river card, but at the same time, once he checks to me, I am really very certain that I have the best hand here. And now the question is really how much do I want to bet and what looks and might want to make him hero call something like ace king, ace jack, ace 10 even, or something like that. I don't think with pocket tens it's not even a hero call. I think it might even be standard to just check call down here, even against a big bet, because my range looks kind of bluffy because I should be betting queens on the turn a lot.
Right. So I want to point out what David was saying, just in case anyone didn't catch the one point, that when he's saying the 8 is a bad card, it's not a bad card because we think that our opponent has likely improved to beat us. It's a bad card because it makes him less likely to hero call if he's a good hand reader, because we could easily
Yes.
hold an 8.
Yes, that's right. An 8 or a flush.
You know, I literally did not even see that that was a diamond, so I'm glad you said that.
Okay.
So this is interesting that you go ahead and you make the shove here. Do you think that, he's likely to hero call off a bet of this size? I mean, his idea is that it's going to look like we're bluffing because we bet so much.
Yeah, I think if we bet like 120-ish or something, I think we would scare him away a bit more because I would value bet really thinly here with like if I don't bet 6x on the turn, for example. I might even bet like some king 6 on the river full value here, according to the range I give him here, which is a lot of no pair high card heavy. So I think if it doesn't really change much about his calling range there. If I bet very big, I think he's going to hero call just as often.
Yeah.
And it might even make him call wider for some weird reason. I mean, people really think that way in a lot of spots, that when someone bets really big, that they widen their calling range instead of tightening it. They don't really have that mathematical approach, but just think along those lines, like he bet really big, so he has to have a bluff here.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another reason why, in general, if you're playing against particularly weak opponents, um, and let's say that you have the nuts and your opponent checks to you and you're in position, if you're not sure, you should always size it on the larger side, because of the fact that they might even call you wider. You don't know that they're going to call a lot tighter. So larger sizing can definitely be a good thing. Um, Now, his call to me looks kind of crazy. Do you agree this is a spew, or do you think based on your turn check back, this is a reasonable call?
I think his line up to the river is fine, but I think the river call is just too wide because the 8 is just such a terrible card to make this hero call for that price. And from his position, I don't really like it. As I said, the 8 improves a lot of my range, and I would even value bet 8x really big here as well. Not really sure what I want to shove, but I guess so. So that fact makes it even worse to just hero there with ace jack.
Okay, perfect. So next hand, and this is against a different opponent. Okay. So he donk bets, and my guess here is that having bottom pair and a backdoor flush draw, there's no way we're going to fold this. I don't see too much point in raising, so I assume we're going to flat.
Yeah, exactly. I also don't really think that. I mean, it's really weird to to not three bet pre-flop and then donk on this texture anyway. But yeah, the fact that we have a pair here with a backdoor flush draw makes it even an easier call. And for this specific hand, the player was donking a lot anyway. That's what I noted about him. He was donking a lot previously to this hand, so even easier call.
Right. Um, so he fires turn again, and so once again, we're going to eliminate folding from our possible options.
Yes.
So that's pretty much going to leave calling or shoving. Um, do you see any reason to put in a raise here, or is this just going to be a standard call?
I was thinking about raising in this spot, and I think it's a good option against some players. But I was thinking that it's really tough for him to fold better hands. If he decided to lead on the flop with Queen X, it doesn't he didn't really seem to be the player that would bet fold Queen X on the turn. So that leaves him with like better 6x that he might bet fold, which would obviously be good, or some 10x. But I didn't even know whether if he like a somewhat reasonable donking range on this flop would contain, I guess, King 10 and Jack 10, and I didn't even know whether he would want to fold a pair in the gutter on the flop. Not to mention flush draws. If he has like 10-5 of spades or something, he is not going to be bet folding this all that often, I think. So I think calling and then making a play accordingly on the river is the better line on the turn.
Okay, and you agree here that his most likely hand is some kind of Queen X hand?
I think Queen X would make a reasonable part of his range, as well as draws, like some weaker flush draws, and as I said, gutters on the flop that turn to pair now, stuff
Okay,
like that. I think that would make sense. Yeah.
okay. So he checks, and now we have the decision of checking or turning our bottom pair into a bluff. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say this is probably not a value bet with their weak
No.
6x hand. Um, so do you think that we have too much showdown value to bluff here, or you think that too much of his range either started off better than us or is now beating us?
I was thinking that this bet is really obviously not intended to make him fold ace x. It might make him fold queen x, although this is doubtful. But the reason I chose to bet here is just to get him off better 6x, 10x, and 7x if he somehow got there with like a flush draw containing a 7 or something. Because it would really suck if I check back and he shows like 7, 8 of spades or something, and I lose a pot that I would very easily win with a bet on the river. So I kind of opened the door here to get called by Queen X and Ace X, which would suck, but then that's how it is.
Yeah,
Um,
and like you point out, once he doesn't 3-bet pre, we have to discount the possibility of ace x.
yes, Ace X as well as King Queen as well, and maybe even like Queen Jack or something. We have to discount this as well.
Right, right, absolutely. And if he had queen 10, he's probably not going to chuck the river. So this is interesting, and goes to show also that there are definitely times when our first instinct might be to just take the showdown value and check back, but there's actually a decent purpose to betting.
I think just from a range perspective, it makes sense to take this hand to bluff. If we had, there would be like, I guess if we had pocket nines, it would make more sense to check back on the river because we don't lose to 7x or pocket jacks for that matter. Of course, that would make a lot of sense to check back. But I think with a hand such as weak as weak 6 there, I think turning this into a bluff makes sense. Just if you kind of split your range there, but.
Right. Okay, perfect. So now we're at three-handed play. Um, Button opens, and I assume we're probably going to flat here. The alternative would be to say 3-bet to 100, but I would say most of the time this is probably just going to be a flat in the big blind. Do you agree?
Yeah, for sure. And I didn't really know that much about this player at this point. We're just started three-handed play, so yeah, very easy flat.
Okay. Now, what's interesting about having a hand like Ace 8 here, which also having the backdoor nut flush draw, is that in a lot of, for example, four-ring contexts, we would say that we've missed this flop. But here, three-handed, button versus big blind, we've actually had a not so bad flop for our hand.
Yeah, for sure. Once he bets flop, I think we beat a lot of his c betting range because you'll c bet all his air there, and also he would. I assume that he most players would check back better hands a non-zero percentage of the time. If he has like ace king or so, he might want to check back here because he has showdown value. Doesn't make too many better hands fold anyway. So yeah, I think on this flop and especially with the backdoor flusher, I think check calling is standard play.
Okay. Now let me ask you this, because you were talking earlier about planning hands. Um, are we concerned that too often when we check call here, that it's going to be a card that is not an ace, an eight, or a diamond, and we're just going to have to check fold?
Uh, that might be a concern, but that would also then for that to be true, that would also mean that the villain in question would also be betting turn like 100% of the time, which is not going to happen. And if there's also a lot of cards that we could continue on, I think if the board pairs, for example, and he still
Right.
bets, we might have to think about his range again. And this is one of those spots, but I didn't. Yeah, exactly. Checks back turn.
Okay. So yeah, turn's a pretty good card for us. Um, Now, river is kind of an interesting spot because obviously we think our ace is going to be the best hand most of the time, or if it's not the best hand, then be a chop. But at the same time, if we bet, then it's going to be tough for many weaker hands to call us, possibly king high or even queen high. So, what's our best approach out of position in a spot like this?
Um, well, I'm kind of biased here because I chose because of the approach I chose here, which was to check jam, and I think, but that was not if he bet bigger here. If he bet like half pot or bigger, I would just be check calling. But I think once he bets this small and he bet very fast, once he bets this fast, I assume that he will be value betting ace X or maybe even king X a lot. And it's perfectly reasonable for us to have 5x. 10x less likely, but I guess 5x makes more sense, which would also all be check jams. And I think making him fold a chop there is very valuable because we will just pick up a very big pot there. And he is just going to call us. I think it's very unlikely that he'll call us there. He will definitely fold ace X. And if he goes for thin value with like pocket eights or so, I think he has a tough call there as well.
Okay. So you're basically looking at this check shove as something close to a free roll, right?
Yeah,
In that he
exactly.
very rarely has a 10 or a 5 here, both from limited number of hand combos that contain a 10 or a 5, as well as if he had checked back the turn, he's probably going to bet larger on the river. So let's say that for whatever reason we had gotten to this spot with, 9 high or whatever kind of air. This would then be a good spot to bluff check raise, I assume.
Yeah, I definitely agree with this. I just think his most likely hands there are mid-strength hands like Ace X and some weakish pocket pair. And if we even another reason to do this, if we had like 9 8 of diamonds, which we would play exactly the same way, then we would also block a lot of his mid pair type combos, which would make this an even nicer play. So yeah, I think this will make a lot of sense to just check jam with a lot of stuff there.
Okay, sweet. So a nice unconventional line there that has very good reasoning behind it. That's really cool. King 9 off. We open small blind flats. So far pretty standard. We raise pre, c-bet the flop, bet turn. So pretty much a real decision doesn't come until the river. Um, so at first glance, I think a lot of players would say, well, this is sort of the ultimate scare card, besides maybe the ace of spades, and so we have to check back. But he probably does not have too many ace-x hands in his range. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely, and I think it's a bad card for the same reason that like in the first hand where we had Queen Five suited, where the or eight of diamonds on the river was a bad card. I think this is kind of like a similar spot because I'm not really scared of being B here all that often, because it's as you already said, it's unlikely for him to have Ace X there. It's really a bad card for me because it's tough for me to get called by 7x now or 4x because he was definitely not and that's what I remember, he was definitely a weakish player, so I think that he views any overcard as a scare card. which the ace it shouldn't really be that much of a scare card for him because I would check back ace x at some point in the hand usually, if it wasn't a pair. So yeah, the question now is whether we want to jam or bet less to get him to call with like 7x or something. And I
Well,
think a jam might scare him off too often, so I chose a smaller sizing.
yeah, I agree. I think that, again, if we had air here, this would be a decent card to jam, but I just don't see it very likely as him calling it off here with the worst hand. So I think we've got to bet small. And what do? You bet 91, which is great. I think sometimes when players see a situation like this, and the logical bet is a shove. When I say logical, I just mean in terms of the fact that we'd be shoving for about 2/3 a pot, which looks like the right risk reward and looks good. But there's no rule that says we have to jam here. We can make a small value bet, and sure enough, that's what gets him to call.
Yes, and I think this is a super exploitable line. If we talk about this, it's very exploitable to bet king x for like less than 1/3 pot and jam all our bluffs, for example. But he is never ever in his life going to realize this, so we can just capitalize on this and make him call with a hand as weak as pocket fives, which is obviously really really bad call, I guess. But yeah, that's good for us.
Perfect. Okay. And that's, by the way, a really interesting example of a time where a lot of the time against weaker players, as a rule of thumb, you want to size your value bets larger and your bluffs smaller. And this would be, just like Dave was saying, a time to do pretty much the opposite. And if we're going to bluff, just go ahead and shove and shut out most of his range and size the value bet smaller. Okay, so we open 5-7. Okay. So here you overbet bluff, and I assume the idea here is one, obviously we have no showdown value. Um, Two, it's tough for him to have much after checking turn and river. And three, we can credibly represent a queen based on the way we've played this hand.
Yeah, this was exactly my reasoning, and I think he won't fold king x too often, but I also think it's unlikely for him to have it. But I think we can get him to fold a jack here with a reasonable bet as well as 8x. So I read in chat that people are hearing noises. Let me just close the door for 1 sec. I'll be back in 1 second.
Yeah, I'm not. Are other people hearing some kind of super annoying noise? I'm not hearing anything.
Okay, I'm back.
So if others are, let me know. Sorry if it's something from my side, but
And
I'm
I'm
not
pretty
hearing
sure it's
anything.
my side. My internet crashed. And I just went to a friend's house, so that's probably what's wrong. It's like there's a plane there. Oh,
But
oh
I don't
wow.
I don't hear anything from your side.
Okay.
Huh. Okay. Well, sorry about that, guys. I'm not sure what the cause is. We'll continue on for now, and hopefully that'll get better.
Yeah, back to the hand. Yeah, as you said, I think it's very easy for me to have queen x and very tough for him to have it. And he might. It's kind of like a reverse logic from the hand before, where if we bet big, we intended to get called lighter, and now we bet big to make him fold jack x, which I guess is contradictory. But at the same time, I don't really think that he's going to realize this all this often, and he will just, if he has jack x, he will just shrug fold and then just think, okay, whatever, we can't really hero call, and that's it. And yeah, I think he folded really really fast there, which made me believe that he had maybe even a weaker hand than I thought. So yeah, and we can, if we get to the river with this weak of a hand, I think we have to bluff, especially on this run out.
Sorry about that. I disappeared for a second to make sure there was no noise I could turn off on my side. But yeah, this is a really good spot to bluff.
Yeah, I was just explaining that it's a lot easier for me to have a queen than it is for him, and if we get to the river with this weak of a hand, I think we kind of have to bluff.
Okay, perfect. Um, so those are the five hands, and what we're going to do now is have you play some live and talk about the different concepts. In particular, try to identify the different player types, and even if we can't specifically categorize them for sure, is come up with guesses, for how people are playing and when we have to adjust. So if you want to, go ahead and load up a spin, and we'll switch the screen sharing so that we're looking at your screen.
Sure, let me just do this. Yeah.
So while David is doing that, the way that I would recommend practicing um, these skills is when you're actually playing is try to make guesses as quickly as possible. And like I said, don't worry so much if those guesses turn out to be incorrect some of the time. What you want to do is just get used to,
I think you
deciding.
should. Sorry for interrupting you. I think you should see the screen now. Is that right?
Perfect. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Great. Let me.
Okay,
So
great.
none of you guys are going to see that yet, but I'm going to pull that up. Give me 1 second to do that. Okay. So you guys should see this game up now. Um, okay. $15 spin. Tell us about min raising from the small blind. Do you think there's a reason to size our raises a little bit larger from the small blind to discourage the big blind from calling?
I don't really think so with stacks this shallow. I think we can just use small sizing, and I was experimenting a bit with this, but I think that having a small sizing is fine here.
Okay. And we see bet small on a relatively dry flop here. Do you think it's correct to say that a lot of players in huge fishes position are not going to be stubborn enough in a spot like that at the
Yes,
flop?
yeah, I definitely agree. I think people would just give up too much to c bets in general, and so we should be c betting our entire range basically.
Okay.
Not our entire range, but a lot of stuff to make them fold. Here we have a obviously pretty easy three bet, and as active as we've been now, we might get some action, but we don't. And then again, min
Wh-
raising here.
Why do you have up the option to show your hand? Are you really doing that when you play?
Oh no, I don't really, but I didn't really think about this. I sometimes do it in MTTs to really make people go nuts, but I think in spins I never really show my hand. I'm not the kind of guy to show a huge bluff or something. I think that's kind of weird. Yeah, I
Okay.
think once we get raised here, we don't really have an option with top pair and him. He might have a bunch of draws and stuff, but
Yeah, it's just pretty unlucky. And
yeah,
that's another part of the stacks being so short. If the stacks are deeper, we might flat or do something different. But once you raises there, we pretty much just have to decide right then for our stack based on shorter stacks.
yes, exactly. And once you raise this flop, it's also kind of tough for him to have two pair really, because a lot of two pair combos he folds pre, and a lot of two pair combos he just flats with, and so that leaves him with very very few combos to have there for value.
Right. Tatiana, I'll answer your question in a second. Insomnia writes, what type of player is this huge fish? You put in a colon D, so maybe that's a joke, but I'm going to answer it anyway. So my guess would be so far is that Keek 321 is too tight. He seems, he's playing this hand, but if I had to guess so far that he's kind of tag or nitty, and that huge fish is maybe a bad lag. He seems to be in a lot of hands, but
Yes.
he open limped once, so probably tag or nit for Keek and some kind of lag or weak or maniac kind of player for huge fish.
Yeah, I would agree with this. I also think that his call with 4 or 5 suited there in the big blind is at least borderline because that's really a hand. I'm all for playing like suited connectors and stuff, but I just don't think that this is a strong enough hand there to defend all that often. Because
Yeah.
even if you flop a pair, you just have the worst hand so often.
Adruno says huge fish is a very strong reg, so I guess I'm aligning this guy. But see, that's the thing. That even proves our point even further. Because just like I said, you can't say anything for sure after a few hands. So if that is true, then our guess that he's loose, I'm guessing, is still correct. And then you would keep on updating from there. But hopefully he's not on this chat as I'm smack talking him.
I hear the key glimpse, and I think ISOing here for value makes a lot of sense. I don't really want to size it too large. I just really want him to call desperately. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
some play. Oh well, until that flop, some players shove there, but raising small is better by like a million times. It's not even close pre whether we should shove or raise small.
yeah, for sure. And I think on this flop we kind of have a decision to make whether we want to bet or check. I think checking here is I think it's actually close, and I would most likely like a check more if I had like the jack spades, obviously. Once he checks again, I think then we can make a very small value bet to get him to call with like weaker flush draws or whatever. Because if he limps, he's less likely to have ace x for sure. So I think on the turn, once we check the flop, we have to bet.
Yeah, perfect. Tachanu wants to know about the Jack 7 suited hand. We min raised that on the button. Is that correct?
I I guess so. Was that at 25 big blinds deep? I don't really remember it now.
Yeah. That's
So
okay.
I'll just
Tachanu, I would say that if the question is, I'm not totally sure of the questions, but generally 25 blinds deep or anything around that, I would be opening with the raise Jack 7 suited from the button. We're
yeah.
saying with 9 blinds. With 9 blinds, that's probably about the bottom of our shoving range on the button.
I think here we could consider ISOing, but I think it sucks a lot if he if he limp jams on us, and then we've been very active. So
So
and it's also tough for him to really continue with all that much like a lot worse.
a lot
So
of
I
the
think
time, I would just shove that pre. What do you think about just shipping it in and trying to take the 80 without a fight?
yeah, this is also a decent line, but I think that would make I would like this more with hands that play worse post flop, whereas Jack 10 plays very well post flop with like a King 4 or something. I would like a jam more with
Yeah,
those type of hands.
I agree with that. And at the flop, I mean, I assume that if you had a hand worse than Jack High, you would bet. Are you checking back the Jack High because you think that you have too much showdown value?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I think on this river, I think it's very likely for him to have Queen X here. So the question is how we want to size our bet here and what looks bluffiest. This is kind of a spot where I think that we have the best hand a lot and we want to make him hero call. So we'll just choose a bigger sizing to try to make him call with some high card hand because it's also we are not representing all that much by betting big. Here I think this is also kind of I think this is a min race and then full to jam, although it's kind of bad. Yeah.
So, what do you think about just shoving the spray for 13? You think that's too,
I mean, it's obviously plus EV to just shove, and if he's a good reg, yeah, might be a better option.
yeah, generally, if, if I know it's a pretty weak player, I would min raise there, but
Yeah, I think
a lot of
against
the time
Keek,
at 13, I'm just open shoving from the small blind.
I think against Keek, for example, we could just min raise fold and feel very good about this. But I think against huge fish, we should be jamming. And here, once he limps, who have pocket fives, which play bad post flop, I think we can just jam here. And also, we should be noticing that he limps a lot of small blinds. So his range there doesn't seem to be all that strong. I think here we could at least try to limp, but I'm afraid that he'll punish us a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the way we're going to take advantage of someone limping a lot is pretty much when stacks are a little bit deeper to ISO very wide, and as they get shorter, to just shove over the limp a lot.
Yes, yes, exactly.
And as the blinds get higher, I mean, 30-63 handed is, well, it's not rare, but it's not super common either. And so pretty much at this stage, it's going to come down mainly to shove fold.
Yeah, for sure. I think at this stack depth, it's very reasonable to use charts for your decision making, or at least to have a guideline there if you use a chart on what hands you would want to
Yeah,
play or
particularly
what hands you don't want to play.
for open shoving. Absolutely.
Yes, this one, for example, would be a pretty easy shove at 9 big blinds.
Yeah. He's probably like 8 tabling or something.
Yeah, I don't really think he uses the search feature, so yeah, he's a turn off. And he makes the perfect call, obviously.
Well, we get it in bad and chop, which is okay, but I was really hoping for the suck out. I guess
Yeah,
we
me
can
too.
settle for the chop. That's okay.
I mean, we can play pretty easily. We can play somewhat perfect against his jamming range, but I think again, once he min raise or limps, we really have decisions to make. That's what makes it tougher. So we have to look out for this.
Yeah, and when we are playing shove fold and it's heads up, there the chart aspect is the easiest because we can just go to a site like hold'emresources.net and it'll produce shove fold charts for us. You shove the king seven offsuit, and I assume that, I mean, folding it'll be a very exploitive play, and there's no reason to play very exploitively against him at this stage. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yes, I agree. I was considering the next hand the limp with 6-3 suited, but then as before, he was attacking our limp, so I don't really want to limp like super weak hands such as 6-3 suited, 7-3 offsuit. So I would rather if I limp, I have somewhat better hand, and then we get punished in the big blind a lot here. I think we could try to limp this one because I think he seems to be calling a pretty good range there, and I think as he did before and when he called King 5. So I think if we limp here, it shows it's better than jamming because you will just call really good range against it.
Okay. Just to clarify, though, of course, shoving would be profitable. Shoving is certainly better than folding. Um,
Yes.
Cahill rates, do you use the same push fold ranges SB versus Big B versus Big Blind when three-handed, and SB versus Big Blind heads up? The answer to that is, unlike in a nine-man, yes, you could use the same charge if you were looking to play unexploitably because there's no ICM, so you can use the heads-up charts when it's blind versus blind. If you're playing shove fold.
Yes. All right. This is again very easy fold.
You're getting majorly card dead, man.
Yeah. I mean that makes it a lot tougher to play against him.
Here we go.
It's also
Five
taking
blinds in a
forever.
dream.
This might be like one of the longest spin and goes that I really ever played.
And interesting that he min raised the hand to go. I think at that stack depth, he would mainly be min raising as a non all in. I don't think he'd have any range for raise folding six blinds.
Yeah, it's strange. I mean, he has to think that I'm like a really, really terrible fish if I if I don't see this as an automatic all in. Really, yeah, we managed to suck out. This is always
Yay!
great.
Awesome. And now you'll get bottom 10% hands for the next 20 hands, and then you can suck out on him again.
Maybe I
Come
mean he
on.
raised
Here we
basically all
go.
his buttons, so
Good
this
flop.
looks good.
Oh,
Oh,
come on.
Yeah, this seems to be taking forever.
We still got this guy. Okay, that works. Back to the chip lead.
Okay. We got outs.
Alright, still in.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's tough to win spin and goes if you don't win all ins. There's a lot of variance in them, obviously. So if you don't win all ins, that might just make you feel that you're doing something wrong, but that's really might not be the case.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's just part of the game. And there's not too much edge won or lost in short stacked heads up against another reg. I mean, obviously with short stacks against some player types, they're going to fold way too often and you can get significant edge from that. But against anyone who plays decently with an effective stack much under 10 blinds, you know, a lot of people are just going to use charts, play Nash,
Yes.
and it's mainly just observing the variance from that. 6-4 probably
I
about
think
the
this
very
might be
bottom of our
close.
range. I think
Yeah.
6-3 off would be a fold there.
And we don't get there this time.
Okay, next one.
So we'll just take the next one.
Sounds good.
Would be funny to have like a huge one,
Yeah.
but
Is it up on your screen? I'm not seeing it at the moment.
oh, don't you see the? Oh, sorry.
Oh, no problem. Are you doing select window or select whole screen? If you do select window, you might have to select it again each
Again.
time, which is fine.
Yeah, my bad. You should see it now.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Yeah.
So what's the bottom of our range that you fold 10 deuce suited, which I would as well? We're opening down to say 10-7 suited.
Yes. Yes, I would. My yeah, 10-7 suited seems like the bottom of our raising range there.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we get 5-1 with the suited king and the big blind. I think there's really not much to discuss there.
Well, definitely not folding. The other option is just a shove with there being 100 out there.
Yes, but I also think that this early in the match, I think we would have somewhat a tough time to get as many folds as we really want to have there. I think here once he leads from the small blind, we kind of have to call because it's unlike that he has more ace X. He leads very very small on the river, which makes it tough. I think we could consider turning this into a bluff, even though if we have somebody behind us, just because it's really tough
As
for.
soon as I saw that Queen of Spades,
Ooh,
oh,
but it's really.
I thought to myself, he's gonna turn this into a bluff. As soon as I saw that card, but it's surprising that he raised snapped. Usually, when someone bets that small on the river, it's showing a ton of weakness.
Yeah,
And so, even though it didn't work out there, we are kind of concerned about the third player. But in terms of that player bet calling a shove, I think that's going to be fairly rare.
yeah, for sure. I also think so because if he had he would bet a lot of flush draws on the flop, and he would. It's a reasonable hand for him to have here would be pocket queens, I guess, because he checks back flop. But it's very very unlikely that the third player will get involved here a lot.
Yeah. Now, if the button min raises here, would you usually fold, call, or three bet? In fact, here he goes. So we'll see the answer to that.
I think I would just call here a lot.
Okay.
Uh, don't see any reason to do anything other than that here, readless. And on this flop, I think if he checks, I think this is a very easy check fold.
Yeah.
Um,
If he checks back, though, I assume we're going to fire a lot of turns because his range should be capped.
yes, exactly. And we could also consider check raising here if he bets super small, because it wouldn't really make that much sense to bet super small on this type of flop. But if he once he bets close to half pot, I think we have a very easy check fold, especially with our hand.
Tachi Nerdy wants to know if you play poker full time.
No, I'm a law student, and I'm trying to finish off law school at the moment, so I'm not a full-time poker player.
Well, I'll ask you more about that in a moment, but let's talk first about the preflop. My most common line there would be to 3-bet to 100 and call it off. What do you think about that?
I think this is a fine play there to 3-bet call, but my assumption is that people um, will just not jam enough worse there to make this profitable. So I think having like a stronger ace x in your range is a good thing there because people will assume, as general populations do, that they don't have too many ace x in their range when they just flat pre. So
But aren't you kind of assuming that he's a reg with decent hand reading?
I guess so, but I also think that even a fish would be somewhat scared or less likely to put in a lot of money with hands that we crush. I mean, he might flat a bit, but oh, that's weird. He might flat a bit, but then ace 10 doesn't really play all that great out of position post flop. Now, we saw that he is getting involved in a lot of pots here so far. I think he has been playing like all of them. And even though this is a fairly large 3-bet, we have like a Broadway combo in position. So I think even though it's a big 3-bet, I think we can call here. I think jamming will just get called by worse. And then once he jams flop, I think we have to give up because we will just be up against ace x quite a bit, which would suck. So
Yeah. So
do
we're
you
gonna.
agree here, or would you have jammed pre? I'm actually interested to know.
Um, I personally am definitely not shoving that pre without a pretty decent read. I would. I don't know. I would have either called or folded. I know folding's tight. We are getting good odds in position, but some of the time I would make that play anyway. Obviously, the reasons you give for calling are very reasonable as well.
I think this is a spot where once he checks on the flop, I think we have to fire, and I think we have to fire at least 2 barrels depending on the run out because he will just oh, he will just be check folding a lot on future streets.
Now we've
Here
got to
with the
act quick and blind this guy out.
yeah with the dead small blind, I think this is also an easy. We should widen our raising range from the button because
Yeah, of
obviously the small
course.
blind's not going to play back.
Um, See, your style is definitely a different one from mine. I think there are a lot more spots where I'm pushing the action pre-flop and you're taking a more small ball approach. Like this one, for example, I'm just shoving that pre, and
Okay.
you're, it seems like you're looking to exploit post-flop weaknesses and take it to the streets, and I'm just looking to, you know,
Yeah,
find
that might be
spots that are
because we
profitable
are.
pre-flop and not take it post-flop as much.
Yes, I think we just come from different backgrounds. I think you just
We're,
come from 9-man sit and goes, which dictate the play there a lot more to be pre-flop. Where if I play, I like to play a lot of like the main game I play are like deep stacked short-handed MTTs, where that style will work a lot. Where you get into a lot of post-flop spots where you can at least try to outplay people and hope that it works. So.
Yeah, we're like the original Odd Couple. They can make a sitcom about us, like a really boring sitcom. The idea is just that you're always calling and going post flop, and I'm always shoving, and there's a studio audience that finds that to be very funny.
Yeah, we should really try that.
Yeah. Insomnia, to answer your question. Oh, nice. Um, about 360 man, 10 cent, or 25 cent, 45 man. People often ask, what's the best format at a given buy-in, and at the very micro stakes, I think they're all going to be relatively soft. So my advice would be more to find a format that you like and build up from there, um, rather than just pick one based on where you think dollar per hour is going to be higher. Because at that level, it's not as if it's going to be easy to make any kind of decent hourly rate. You're more playing those levels to build up, gain experience, rather than maximize hourly rate. Why he raise 34 and pot of 60 with top pair? Why not half? Um, Betting those odd numbers is just one of those things we've talked about before a little bit in this coaching, that it can look a little more intimidating, but it doesn't really matter all that much. Right, David? Do you agree with that?
Yeah,
Betting.
I agree with that, but I also try to pick my C betting size on board textures. There was like I think there was the spot where we got it in with Jack 9 against 5-4 on a 9
Right.
5-4 flop with two clubs, and I think I C bet a bit bigger there, which obviously is just to charge weaker hands there. Whereas if I have King 9 on a 9 deuce deuce board, I might C bet smaller because there's really not that much that can call anyway, and just to widen their calling ranges.
Right.
So I really just try to change my C bet size according to the board texture, stack sizes.
Okay. Now, we haven't played a ton against this guy, but if you had to categorize him up until this point in the match, which sort of category would you guess he is?
Well, he hasn't been playing many hands post flop, so I don't think he really is main. He has been shoving a lot pre-flop.
So
So
probably
he might
tag?
be, yeah, that's what I was thinking, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. That's what I would guess he is.
Here I think we have a decision whether we want to jam or min raise. But I think min raise would make sense if obviously if we call, but then also if we think that we crush him there, if we min raise and call off, which fours never really do, fours never really crush his jamming range there. So I think jamming ourselves and to win this pot is the better play.
Well, if we min raise, I mean, obviously we're gonna min raise call. It would
Yeah,
be a
for sure.
terrible
We
min
are
raise
not min raise
fold.
folding. Yeah, but if we min raise and he decides to jam on us with a lot of stuff and he jams like 10-9 suited or something, then that would not be great to get it in there. I mean,
That's
we
true,
have
but
to.
oh, here we go. The one benefit, of course, is that there are deuce X and 3x hands that he could shove. Oh, nice run out
Yes,
there. That he could shove if we min raised, that are almost all going to fold otherwise.
yeah, that's true.
But nice win there. While this is pulling up, is it you talking about being in law school? Is that really tough to balance the poker? I'm sure social life and other stuff, along with being a law student.
Yeah, for sure. It was. I mean, poker is definitely a job where it's cool that you can have your own hours and you can just dictate your schedule the way you want to. But also, it's really tough to focus on a lot of things there, and it's definitely tough to balance if you want to be good at everything. And my volume dropped down a lot when I had a lot of stuff to do at law school. So yeah, you just really have to think about this a lot if you want to be good at everything and just want to do everything. Do you see the screen? I don't really.
Yes. Yeah, I've just been looking at this kind of interesting hand. You check the
Yeah.
turn, which I like, and now he bets pretty big. Are you considering a hero call here?
Uh, I I was considering it, but I don't think this is the spot to do it because on this river, I mean, basically all of his bluffs even got there. So I'll just give him credit for having it here. Not to mention that he could have like weak ace x here and try to get a call from the exact hand that we have here. So I don't really think that hero calling here is great.
Right. And somebody wants to know how many tables you normally play.
That depends on the format.
Let's say
If I play
spins.
spins, not really more than four.
Okay.
I'm just not really all that great at multi-tabling a lot of tables. Like if on a Sunday, when MTTs run, I might 10 table, but that's about the absolute maximum.
Well, 4 tabling spins I think is tougher than 10 tabling NTTs. At least it is for me.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with this. It's just shorthand in place. There's even with short stacks, there's just so much more to consider, and also um, on a Sunday, it's also really tough to yeah, we lost that one. Tough to balance it if you have like a couple heads up MTTs and a couple of shorthanded 4 max MTTs or something. That will make it really tough as well.
Right, right.
Yeah, we lost this one. I think it's really tough to get a fold there with top pair, although his line looks somewhat strong. I think it just load up another one.
Yeah, to me the only thing that was at all close about that one was the call pre.
Yeah, we got 5-1. I mean, it's a definitely close one, but yeah. Here we could consider now 3-bet calling. I think blind versus blind is um, different than big blind versus button. So I think 3-bet calling here, blind versus blind, especially against a big open, is fine.
All right, good. We are definitely in agreement with the 3-bet call and pretty interesting flop here. I assume this is going to be tough for us to get away from.
Yeah, I think once we bet here, we can just bet call. And yeah, we're just gonna size it small and call the shove, basically, even though min raise is somewhat scary, but yeah.
How does he possibly have 5-3 there? Are you serious?
And that's
Wow.
as I said, spins can be really, really profitable.
5-3.
But that also
Satoshi Neridu says, how about shoving ace 10? Now, shoving ace 10 is obviously profitable, but, if he's going to raise call a hand like 5-3 offsuit, then even though it didn't work out there, in the long run, that's obviously very good for us. So that's the reason, you can have weaker recreational players who make just crazy raise calls, but they will very likely tighten up, if you shove on them.
yes. It really strengthens your argument that we should be 3-betting a lot more. 3-bet calling, obviously, but here if he really flats from the small blind with 3-5 offsuit against a 3-bet, then it's very, very profitable, obviously, to be 3-betting.
Yeah, unless the flop always comes 5-3x. That would hurt us.
Yeah. I think in this hand, a lot of people would tend to check the turn to him to let him barrel again, but I think most people will not be barreling too often when the top card pairs. So I think having a leading range there is definitely good.
Right. So this is kind of interesting here. Is this a good hand because it doesn't play all the while post, so just the sort of long ball 3-bet shove?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And we can't really make a mistake by jamming there anyways. So just go the somewhat safe route and just jam it.
Tacho Neridu is asking about betting more on turn in the King 10 hand. The thing about it is that a smaller bet he's more likely to interpret as weak. So I think that's going to be the range to keep his range the widest. Let him float that bet, maybe possibly even bluff raise it. So I'd like the smaller sizing there.
Yeah, I think I could have actually gone a tad bigger. I think Powell's at like 200 something, not bet 80 something. So I think going a tad bigger here is definitely fine too. But yeah, definitely not going too bad. I mean, half pot is definitely too big there once the top card pairs and you lead, because it just looks really, really strong.
Yeah.
So Mosquito has been raising a lot so far. So maybe it could be tagged as even somewhat close to a maniac, because I don't really think he has full hand so far. Whereas at Satoon wasn't all that involved, if I get this correctly.
Um, looks like there's a tiny bit of lag there, but looks good now.
Okay.
Um, Cahill, to answer your question, we were talking a little bit earlier about the HUD, and yes, our guest does normally use a HUD, but finds it to be somewhat less useful for spins compared to other formats.
Yes, I mean, usually I just use it while playing, but I thought just because it takes a lot from the screen, make it easier for viewers to watch this without me using a HUD. And also, if we just focus on categorizing players and stuff, I think we can just go with the reads we have and just focus on that rather than they're not all that meaningful if we have like 5 to 10 hand samples or something.
Right.
Yeah, I think the internet is lagging quite a bit, right? You have still
There's
have
there's definitely
problems
some lag, but
on
it looks
your
like
end?
it's okay now. The pocket tens.
Okay.
Um, but we'll make this the last game, and after that, just take any questions or finish like that. But that should be pretty good timing.
Okay. A very easy jam against him. He's been raising like I think literally 100% of buttons so far. So I
Yeah,
think there's really
yeah, definitely
not
playing
much to.
kind of like a maniac so far.
And here have a maniac in the big blind and a player who has a very reasonable stack to jam our over our min raise from the button. I think we should definitely tighten our raising range from the button. I mean, 8-5 up is definitely not a hand of a one raise, but it would also raise tighter than usual here from the button for those reasons.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. So that's a good adjustment against a maniac. One of the ones we were looking at in that article is that a hand that you're mainly looking at taking the blinds as the big part of your profit, you should be less inclined to open against a very active player. So just typed an answer to your question, MacGyver, and the VIP changes. We've talked about that a little bit in recent coachings, but I don't think nothing is going to kill the games or do anything like that, but certainly not going to help all that much. Button shoves here for 7, pretty standard confrontation.
And we're heads up.
So based on what we know about this kind of player, are there any adjustments you're going to make to your normal heads-up strategy against him?
Yes, I would. Of course, I'm going to have a limping range because he seems to be. If I ever get to this, I would be having one. But yeah, I would think about having a limping range against him because he seems to be very aggressive pre and post flop. Um, that would be one thing, and then just have a tighter. Uh, just basically, he was a maniac, and so just go by the guidelines that we have about maniacs that we discussed earlier.
Right. Uh, Touchy Nerdu writes a question. You're playing very well. How you cannot beat the 30s? It brings up the point that if someone plays a certain level, that doesn't mean that if they moved one level higher, that they would become a loser. Um, Oh, he's disconnected. That's pretty sweet. It means that that's the level where they think that they're going to maximize their dollar per hour, um, and possibly want to limit swings. Um,
Yes.
and an example of that is I see a lot with MTT players where they play games where in theory they should have an edge, but that those tend to, the higher stakes games they play tend to dominate their results. So if they run bad in those, then no matter how well they're doing in lower stakes games, it's going to come down to how they do in their higher buy-ins. And so a lot of it isn't just, what is the absolute highest buy-in, where in theory I have some kind of an edge.
Yes, you just. I completely agree with you, and you just have to not only think about whether you're plus an EV in a certain lineup, whether it may be the $30 spin and go player pool or whatever game you want to play. There are just a lot more considerations to make, especially if you play such a variance heavy game such as spins. You just have to have the kind of bankroll to play those games. And I think a lot of people underestimate swings for any sort of poker game
Yeah,
because people just got a lot better these days, and swings will get tougher in any sort of game.
absolutely. MacGyver writes, why not shove that ace-4 offsuit?
Because I was thinking that he would be jamming very very wide, and I would get it in. I would think he would just fold too much if I jam, but he could be jamming himself, thinking that he has more fold equity than he actually has.
Okay. And then how many buy-ins for spins? 400 buy-ins. That's another thing we've talked about somewhat before on this coaching, the number of buy-ins and how it's not always just a mathematical decision. But with that said, 400 sounds pretty high. I would say that unless you want to make it 100% impossible that you go broke, so long as you're a winning player, that 200 buy-ins should normally be plenty. Um,
Yeah, I agree with this, especially because I haven't really experienced huge swings in spin so far. So I would definitely agree with 200s being plenty. And there's also a possibility to sell some action to higher stakes and just have half of your action, or 60, 70, 80% or whatever. So you can just reduce variance by doing that as well.
Right. A touch Henry says 100. 100 is fine as well. I mean, the thing about it is that, like, let's say, for example, you have 50 buy ins. Um, well, it's certainly possible that you're going to go broke, but most of the time during day to day playing, you're not going to drop 50. So it just comes down to, are you okay if you go on a bad downswing, which eventually you will drop 50 buy ins, there's no question. Are you okay reloading if that happens?
Yes. And also, if you don't really want to reload, whether you would be able to move down. And a lot of people have problems with moving down. And if you do, you should probably just have a more a stricter bankroll management than if you would be okay with moving down a stake or two again.
Yeah, right, absolutely. Because yeah, that's the other thing you can do. If you start losing, then you move down. So, any last questions? Type them in, and then we're going to end things after that. Go back to our splash screen here. Um, this is the last week of the main Spin and Go course. We will definitely have future spin content, but it's not going to continue for now as spins every week. Um, so I guess it's pretty much that. Any last words, David?
Well, it was fun being on here, and thanks for inviting me. And also, I encourage people to play spins because I think it's a really great game still. And for anybody who really wants to have a good hourly, I think taking spins, or at least trying out spins and including them in your schedule, is a good decision.
Okay, perfect. And thanks so much for coming on and showing us your thought process, which is awesome. And the one thing that I would suggest you guys to take away from this is think about unconventional lines. And you don't have to start playing, super fancy right out of the gate, but think about times, for example, when you have showdown value, and is this a good spot to turn my hand into a bluff? or to try to fold out a chop, or some of the things we looked at today. And occasionally you'll find really good spots for that, even if you don't generally play a very tricky style. So that's going to be it. And thanks very much for everyone for tuning in today. And Tatiana Eridu, it's great to have you on the other week. And Aid Bruno, great job on the recent results. Beatdown Star, you're very welcome. So have a great week at the tables, guys, and catch you next time on Wednesday. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, guys.